This is America of the 18th century. America before the machine. And this is the village of Greenfield, a typical community in a young nation still at peace with itself. Henry Ford built Greenfield Village as a nostalgic monument to an innocent world he would never see again. A world which Ford and others like him had already destroyed. This is another Henry Ford monument. Measured in miles, this Ford plant at River Rouge is only a short distance from Greenfield Village, but measured in time, it's worlds away. Here, raw materials are shaped, assembled, finally emerge as finished products. It's a simple, logical process, but it represents a revolution far beyond the wildest dreams of 18th century man. To understand just how the Industrial Revolution destroyed the Greenfield villages of America so completely, we must go back almost 2 centuries. Village life was simple. Work was geared to meet the modest needs of a largely agricultural nation. Skilled craftsmen worked alone in their own shops. Most work, however, was still done at home. If you could afford to, you imported cloth from England. Otherwise, you spun your own yarn, made your own cloth. Manufacturing was all but unknown. Why manufacture goods? How much easier to be a farmer when land was there for the taking. Those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God. So spoke Thomas Jefferson in 1784. Jefferson saw no reason for manufacturing, and neither did most of his countrymen. It was easier to import from England, where the industrial age had already begun. America seemed destined to remain a land of farmers and seafaring merchants. The ships of New England carried American raw materials, cotton, flax, lumber, tobacco, wool, to Europe, and brought back manufactured items. America was dependent on Europe. It was a smooth system, as long as events in Europe were smooth. But in the early 1800s, Great Britain and France went to war. Threatened American shipping. In retaliation, the American government placed an embargo on all goods going abroad. This blow, plus the later war of 1812 against England, crippled the American shipping industry and almost cut off the import of manufactured goods. By the end of the War of 1812, Thomas Jefferson had changed his mind about manufacturing. We have experienced what we did not believe. There exists power enough to exclude us from the field of interchange with other nations. To be independent for the comforts of life, we must fabricate them ourselves. We must now place the manufacturer by the side of the farmer. The circumstances had changed. Americans, largely cut off from Europe, needed to industrialize. And New England merchants, unable to sail their ships, were looking for new ways to invest their money. A few years earlier, an Englishman named Samuel Slater had shown them a way.
When I was a young man in my 20th year, I chanced upon an advertisement in an American newspaper offering a price for improved cotton machinery. Having been apprenticed in the English firm of Master Richard Arkwright, who had invented a machine for spinning raw cotton into cotton thread, it occurred to me that such an invention would do well in America. Dressing myself in the guise of a farm boy, I boarded a ship for New York. I told not even my own mother of my intentions, for English law forbade export of machinery, even drawings or models, and skilled workmen were not allowed to leave. I landed in New York and thence made my way to Rhode Island, where a wealthy merchant offered to set up a cotton mill if I could reproduce the English machinery. Relying on my memory only, I built such a cotton spinning machine. We chose a spot along the Pawtucket River with ample water power to run our machinery. There, in 1791, we constructed a mill, the machinery of which was run by 9 children between the ages of 7 and 12.
It was a modest beginning to the American Industrial Revolution. One small mill doing nothing more than spinning thread, for the weaving still had to be done elsewhere. One invention smuggled out of England, brought over by an Englishman and set up in a small English-style mill. What then was the American element, the American contribution to the Industrial Revolution? Perhaps it began with a small group of men in Massachusetts in 1813.
Well, there it is. The Boston Manufacturing Company. It's official. Let's hope it'll be successful as well.
Of course it will be successful, Francis. English looms can turn out miles of cotton in a single day. It must work in this country, too.
They've even improved on the English design. Anyhow, what else can the Lowell family do with its money? With England at war, you can hardly get your ships out to sea.
I know. You're probably both right. If I'd had any serious doubts, I wouldn't have invested so heavily. And I think one day we're going to be very rich men. I suppose the only doubts I have are the ones that come the moment before doing something quite new.
Well, it's hardly new to use English machines.
Oh, I know, Patrick. But it's one thing to use English machinery. We're doing something more. If we can really do what we're setting out to do, if we can really feed raw cotton into one end of the building and bring out finished goods at the other end, we'll have done something that's never been done before.
Oh, come, Francis. Surely someone must have thought of something so simple long ago.
But no one had. Francis Cabot Lowell and a few New England friends set up the first modern factory in human history. Formerly, even in England, operations had been separated. Cloth was spun in one mill, like Slater's, woven in another, and bleached in yet another. In 1814, at Waltham, Massachusetts, the process was streamlined. Nothing new was manufactured. No new machine was introduced. All that happened in this building was that the old processes were combined, so that the entire manufacturing process from beginning to end took place under one roof. Why hadn't this happened in Europe? Perhaps because in America there were fewer traditions to upset. To Francis Lowell and his associates, there was no established way of doing things. Therefore, they were free to think of the most practical way of getting them done. Their talent was not for craftsmanship, but for organization, for doing the obvious. Within a few years, the Waltham factory was turning out 30 miles of cotton a day, and the price to consumers had dropped from 25 to 6 cents a yard. The owners looked around for another site. They knew that with more water power, they could run more looms. The question was, where could they find it?
Why not buy up the Pawtucket Canal?
At first, it seemed a fantastic idea. But when Francis Lowell thought about it, he realized that buying the Pawtucket Canal would give his factory the full power of the Merrimack River, which had a fall of over 30 feet. This enormous power could run a great many looms. And so Lowell decided to buy the canal. He could never have done such a thing in England, where water power had long since been parceled out in small amounts, with the result that factories had to stay small. Only in America was it feasible to think in large, daring terms. Lowell bought the Pawtucket Canal, built the biggest factory in America, and founded the city of Lowell. But there was still one trouble plaguing Lowell and the other early industrialists. Machines could break down. And since it took a skilled craftsman to hand fashion every part, repairs often took weeks. A gun, for instance, was still the work of a craftsman. Each part was carefully and slowly fashioned by hand. That is why Eli Whitney's proposal to the Secretary of the Treasury in 1798 seemed nothing short of madness.
10,000 muskets. I shall produce 10,000 muskets in 28 months. If the government agrees to the contract, I believe I can do it.
Mr. Whitney, neither I nor the President can imagine how you plan to produce so many muskets in such a short time. Where will you get the gunsmiths?
I won't be using gunsmiths.
The country needs the guns. If you say you shall deliver them, we trust you.
Perhaps the idea had first occurred to Eli Whitney when he invented his cotton gin. However he happened to think of it, it was brilliantly simple. Parts to machinery should be interchangeable. Instead of a skilled workman making each piece by hand, precision machines would turn out thousands of machine parts which could be used interchangeably. It was another example of thinking of the obvious. In an America short of skilled craftsmen, craftsmen would no longer be necessary. The machine, not the man, would be skilled. But at the end of 28 months, Whitney had not delivered even one of his promised muskets. He went to President Adams, hoping to save his reputation by giving the president a demonstration of his new system.
Mr. Whitney, the President will see you now.
How do you do, Mr. Whitney? Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, gentlemen. Mr. Whitney, we are all aware of the fact that you did not fulfill your contract for the musket. I know, sir. I know, and I regret very much not having done so. I only ask that you look for yourselves. Here is a musket lot, complete, made by a craftsman in what I shall call the old style. And here is a supply of musket parts, turned out by machinery, each part exactly identical. Now I ask you, Mr. President, to select a part from each pile at random, put them together, and show the members of your cabinet that without any special training at all, you can form a complete musket lot. My congratulations. I would never have believed that molds and machines could turn out parts so exactly equal. That even a man with no experience as a gunsmith could fit together a lock. Do you realize what this means? Yes, and it can be mass-produced in a factory. Thousands and thousands of them.
Instead of a reprimand, Whitney was given an extension of time and another $20,000. Thanks to the idea of interchangeable parts, repairs were faster and easier, mass production was possible, and, perhaps most important, anyone could now be a workman. On the farms of the nation, a major change was taking place. People began gradually to leave the land, to walk off the farm and into the factory. It took no special skill to be a worker. Anyone could operate a machine. Where machines clustered, so did people. The cities of America began to swell. New York City, 1790. Population, 33,131. New York City, 1820. Population, 123,706. New York City, 1840. Population, 312,852. Like a magnet, the factory drew people to the city. Often they lived badly. Usually they earned little, but still they came. Slowly, gradually, the city would replace the farm as the dominant unit in American life. But as factory production increased and goods piled up, one problem was obvious: how to get the goods to the consumer. At the beginning of the 19th century, methods of transportation had changed little since ancient times. To go upstream was impossible. To ship long distances by land, too costly. In order to spread the Industrial Revolution, a transportation revolution was needed. In 1825, the Erie Canal was opened with fireworks, parades, and the ceremonial pouring of water from Lake Erie into the Atlantic. With this giant man-made ditch, the East and West were suddenly linked. Goods from the factories of New England had found a cheap way of traveling west. The steam engine, a revolutionary source of power. Goods and people could now travel upstream as well as down. The western rivers of America now became great arteries of trade, carrying eastern goods. But the most revolutionary development was still to come. With the railroad, America's vastness was no longer an obstacle, but rather an asset. Rail lines could span the entire continent. American manufacturers had before them the largest market for goods in human history. America on the eve of the Civil War. Compared to 50 years before, a country radically changed. Already a fifth of the nation had flocked to the cities. The factory was firmly established, principally in the Northeast. Bound by the link of the railroad, it also served the growing West. But if the North was now the land of industry, the South was still the land of cotton. The Civil War was to be not only a war between North and South, but a war between plantation and factory. By 1860, the stage had been set. Machinery had been introduced, mainly from England. Under the leadership of Francis Lowell, it had been placed under one roof to turn out finished products. Eli Whitney, parts were made interchangeable so that skilled craftsmen were not needed, and anyone could operate a machine. Water power was replaced by steam. And later coal was used to make the steam. Labor came from the countryside to run the machines. And a network of rails, canals, and steamships carried the goods over the breadth of the nation. In the space of 50 years, the old world was gone. In the space of 50 years, the foundations for a new world had been laid.